Welcome along to DigiShift 59, everyone. So today's topic is using virtual reality to deliver youth work activities. I don't think we've had anything on VR on DigiShift previously. So today we're going to hear from Darran Gillan, who's National Digital Development Lead at YMCA Scotland, and he's going to explain how the YMCA use virtual reality headsets and software to deliver youth work activities to their service users during the pandemic and beyond. Finding that video conferencing wasn't really a suitable replacement for traditional youth work, YMCA Scotland sought a more fun and engaging way to connect with young people. So Dan's going to share the journey that YMCA went on, transforming work being delivered by video conferencing to young people meeting for a coffee in a virtual reality space. So I'm going to hand over to Dan. It's going to be the usual DigiShift format, where after that we'll have a chance for discussion and Q&A. So I'll hand over to Dan just now.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Morning, everybody. There are some very familiar faces on this call that I see already. Yeah, hi, Lily, and Stephen as well. And there's a few here that I've not seen before. So yes, as Ross had said, I am Darran Gillan and the digital lead at YMCA Scotland. Some of you will have already seen some part of these slides and some of the concepts and ideas that I'm going to present. And then some of you, it may be new to you for the very first time. So I'm going to very briefly go through a quick 10-minute presentation. And yeah, as Ross said, we'll then kick off with some Q&A afterwards. All right, so using virtual reality to deliver youth work activities. So some of the things that I'm going to be talking about here is covering some of the kind of theory that we learned and developed and applied. Some of it is about the design and the development of the actual virtual reality youth spaces that we had started to develop through design hops. And just how that's all kind of developed through the links with funding, particularly through the Loneliness and Isolation Fund that YMCA Scotland received from YouthLink, and also from the lottery during the pandemic. So for a lot of you, you may be familiar with this statement. So this is from the YouthLink website in terms of their strategy for relationships with young people. Young people develop meaningful relationships with their youth workers. And for me, that's a key driver within all youth work, is that meaningful relationship part. And how do we develop that? How do you cultivate that? How do you develop those connections? And they have been embedded in our in-person youth work prior to the pandemic for years, to the point where it's almost like an unconscious thought in terms of how we deliver that. And then what happened is when the pandemic came, and for those of you who are aware, we've got £150,000 makerspace at Paisley, and there's also a digital makerspace in Tayside YMCA. Those sites get shut down, and then what happened is that you saw a mass movement of youth organisations and other community organisations starting to move their in-person offering online, but it was very much an ill fit. And what happened is that you had a screen to communicate, but more times than not, it acted more like a barrier, as opposed to this kind of like saving grace that we can't communicate with young people anymore. So we'll use video conferencing, Zoom, Teams, and all the rest. But it actually became counterproductive to that meaningful relationship, because of the barriers to technology. Digital poverty now is a word that's all embedded in our brains 2 years down the road. So lots of young people, particularly young people from areas of deprivation that we all work very closely with, don't have the structure to be able to have that meaningful relationship. So it was about, how do we use technology in a way to cultivate that meaningful relationship that we had prior to the pandemic. So one of the things that we found as we started to develop our online digital offering, and this was kind of prior thinking towards going towards a kind of VR platform, was that, again, we unconsciously didn't analyze it too much because we're used to that in-person experience within our youth centres or in street work. But it's how we engage and communicate with each other, but how do we also learn, because obviously the informal education learning nature that is youth work. And these 7 styles of learning really became apparent for us about how do we then replicate that in a way which we're going to translate well. So within a video conferencing platform, yes, you've got a visual element there through a screen, although it's 2-dimensional and it's limited. If you've got people with sight issues or additional support needs, and they maybe have trouble, recognizing facial cues and things, that can be quite a difficulty and a barrier for them. Some people, like to have things explained to them, but at the same time as having something explained, they might want to do the physical aspects of that as well. So you're speaking to them, but you're showing them simultaneously. And again, these things are very difficult to try and replicate in an online platform, particularly within like Teams and things. So as we were going through and thinking about all these different styles of learning, all these different ways that people interact and engage with each other, we started to look about what other technologies are available out with video conferencing platforms that would closely mirror that in-person experience that we've all taken for granted, and that would all meet these kind of 7 styles of learning. So what we did is that we undertook what was the design hop training that it's free, and I was checking it out last night. It's still available there. I can't remember the person's name who delivers it, but I think through the SCVO website. So that was really helpful to us. And what that did is it really helped us to structure, because again, it was kind of difficult to try and get a group of people together, young people and youth workers, and try and think about how do we replicate these 7 styles of learning in a way that's beyond video conferencing. And the Design Hop platform was a really good way of doing that for us, that approach. And so that allowed us to kind of discover and define our problem, what our issue was, start to develop some kind of solutions round about it, and those kind of next steps. So what we did is we did some online youth consultation, talked about, what did young people tell us about what they didn't like about video conferencing, the fact that they're having to use it for school, they're having to use it to socialize with family members that they couldn't normally see, like their grandparents, because they had to isolate. And again, there was lots of youth organizations, community organizations that were then asking them to engage on this platform for other youth activities. So they were pretty much fatigued at this point. And also you had the other issues of 1 laptop per family. So there was limited access. So we were again looking for a way where, young people could engage in a platform where they could use a tablet, a mobile phone, a laptop, and a VR headset. And of course, one of the issues with that is VR headsets. If you're dealing with young people from deprived areas, yeah, fair enough, they might have a mobile phone, but they're sure not going to have a VR headset. So one of the issues that we had to then develop as part of our next steps, when we identified that VR was a way that was going to closely marry all of those 7 styles of learning and engagement and communication, was how was this going to be funded? Because the idea that in order for this idea to work, we would have to distribute 20, 30 VR headsets into people's homes. And fortunately, part of that story was solved through the Loneliness and Isolation Fund, through YouthLink at that point, and also through the lottery. And between the both of them, we managed to get the software, and we also managed to get the hardware. And what we explained to both of those funders is that this was an ongoing developing project. So it was kind of agile in nature, where we had the basic building blocks of what it was that we wanted to develop, which was a way to engage young people through a more meaningful relationship using technology, using VR, but we weren't quite definitive and defined in terms of the outcomes of what this was going to look like. So, as with all things, when we were going through our design and investigation phase, 9 times out of 10, somebody on the internet's already thought of what you've already done, or partly they've already addressed part of the issue, because we were looking at maybe developing or building a replica of our makerspace, or even a youth space. We were getting quotes of about between £5,000 and £8,000 just to build the environment. And we felt that was going to be really difficult for any funder to part with that kind of money for something that wasn't a tangible product. So what we then did was, through harnessing the global power of the YMCA movement, operating in 120 odd countries with a 65 million membership, it was recognized and understood that a lot of the current VR platforms that are out there are used for commercial communication and high-end events, but they were not really considered during the early days of the pandemic as an education, communication, or youth work tool. So what happened is that we then approached Engage VR based in Ireland and Spatial IO based in San Francisco, and said, look, we could actually test out your products for other alternative services and uses that you've not considered. And we have a market that's global that you could potentially use to exploit, and I mean exploit in a commercial positive way, to expand your services and offerings. And they were really interested in this. And what they did is that they gave us the keys to the kingdom at that point, and without having to pay for any of the costing platforms, they gave us all of full access to their environments. And what these were really plush, really high-end environments, such as what Ross was mentioning. One was a coffee shop, and we would invite young people after we got 30 odd headsets from the lottery, and we got some of the software from the isolation, the Loneliness and Isolation Fund from YouthLink. All of that helped us to then build, using the current environment, the rooms that they had within Spatial at that point, to then bring people together in a more sociable way that allowed us to then really engage a little bit further within those 7 styles of communication and learning that just wasn't happening or taking place within your video conferencing platforms. And I'm just going to show this. Some of you will already have seen this video before, but it's just to give those who haven't seen this a demonstration of, here is a platform where young people can come and engage, collaborate, develop ideas. We developed a virtual incubator. And so what we did is we got young people together, and you could basically just call out Google, and Google would appear magically in front of you in this virtual space. And you could call out, and because it was voice sensitive, because again, you want to talk to people with, spelling and things like that, you didn't want that to be a prohibiting barrier, is that if you spoke out audibly about, I want to see pictures of cats, you would have about 7 or 8 pictures of cats that would then you know, appear, and you would take out whatever picture of kits would, you know, suit your project. And it was a much more collaborative way. And as the platform started to develop, the features of these things started to develop and replicate real in-person experiences. So it meant within a youth work, within a room, they were starting to develop the audible areas of it. So 2 or 3 people could go away in a corner of the shared same area, but I wouldn't be able to hear them because it was distance audible. They've got a, you know, an exact term for it, but they could go into a corner of one space, and I wouldn't be able to hear them, just like you would be able to replicate that in an in-person experience. So over the 2 years, as we started to develop the purpose, and that was the real key element for us, was the purpose of how to use these platforms, more so than it was about the platforms themselves. As the platform started to really develop more into a replication of a real in-person space, it was through that defining the issue, defining the problem, the solution, and going through the design hop that we undertook, that allowed us to then really understand how to properly utilize these platforms as they started to develop, and it started to define more in enhance and develop how we were going to use these platforms in a way that was going to closely replicate these 7 styles of learning and engagement. And then what that really allowed for us to do was develop our mental health program. So as part of when we were doing these incubators and we were having just social evenings where, you know, young people would just sit in a coffee shop and drink a virtual cappuccino, and we would just chat about what we were doing and play games. It started young people, with the 30 odd young people that we worked with across Paisley and Tayside and a couple of other YMs in Edinburgh and things. It started to allow those young people to engage with each other in a way that they would never have engaged with each other before, because our YMs, essentially, because they're geographically based, tend not to engage with each other unless it's like a big national event. But what it also did is it allowed us to then talk about, in a more relaxed and informal environment, about the mental health and challenges that they were experiencing in terms of the lockdown. And then what we were doing is that we were doing these in environments. So one of the environments was a campfire, and it crackled. This campfire crackled, and we would all sit around these logs, and you could hear crickets in the background, and it was nighttime, and you could look up and you could see the stars. And so that started to allow, within this environment, people started to forget after a little while that they were in a virtual environment, and that they then started to then kind of relax a little, and it then started to allow for genuine conversations to take place, for that meaningful relationships to start to develop in a way that you just wouldn't be able to replicate. And then off the back of that, what we then understood now, as of today, 2 years doing this going forward, is about the theory and the underpins everything that we use these platforms going forward. So again, some of the people who have been on this call already have already, you know, heard me talk about digital praxis and about, you know, the digital tools. It's really important, and this was one of the things that wasn't caught or understood at the very early stages, when you had organizations just all of a sudden they started to deliver online, and it was an ill fit, because a lot of what they were trying to do was replicate what they did in person online, and that just wasn't working because they didn't understand the digital tools that they were working with. And you have to understand the theory and understand that part of it first before you go out and launch something. And what we then started to understand is that as young people start to then have long-term exposure and use of virtual reality or any digital tool for a long period of time, is that they start to intuitively start to then adopt and start to develop their own approach and ideas of how they're going to use this under a constructivism type background. And what we're seeing as part of that now is that this theory of connectivism, and that as they start to look at virtual reality and incorporate Google and Figma and TikTok into these virtual environments, they're starting to then develop their own styles and their own ways of learning. And this basically then kind of cultivated into in person. So we went back to taking VR, not splitting that across 30 odd isolated homes where people could then meet in a virtual space. We then brought everything back together. So we took them into large halls and they engaged in person with each other in that virtual environment. Now you might think, what's the point of doing that? Because they're in a virtual environment. But it was that sense of that they knew each other was there, and they could hear each other, or in the room as well as in a virtual space, and that added another dimension to it. But we wouldn't have understood to do it that way if it wasn't through the theory and getting youth workers to understand the theory and the impact that that would have. So I'll just come out. Let's just stop share. So that's a very, very quick kind of overview of how we've used virtual reality in a youth work setting, and the kind of theory and how we came to that journey from the doing in person, doing a Teams or a Zoom call to where we are with it now. And what's going to happen with all of this is that there's going to be a service design recipe, and that's going to be featured on the iMind website, and that goes into a huge amount of detail, a lot more detail with a lot of links as to how we develop it and how you can replicate it essentially, as opposed to the very quick kind of 10-minute overview that I've just provided there. But I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thanks, Dan. That was amazing. That was really good. That was really interesting. Yeah, and just to echo the stuff around the service recipe will be coming soon, which will just be nice to be able to see this fully written out so that people can actually take it and replicate it and pick out the elements that are going to work for them. So any questions from anyone in the room? And those of you who don't have video on, do feel free to join us, but that is totally optional. Okay. John, any reflections from you?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I really love the idea of the digital campfire. It sounds really nice. A quick question I wondered about is, I'm guessing that some of your young people you're working with probably took to it quite easily, either because of prior experience or maybe because of the setup they had at home. But I guess others may have found it a bit more tricky to get into, and I wondered how you supported people with that, where you had some people who maybe were jumping in with both feet and other people who were a bit less sure.
Yeah, so there was two issues with that. So when we were introducing virtual reality to young people so you've got some young people who might have got a headset for their Christmas or a birthday or had something lying about. And one of the things that we were doing with this was that there was a novelty factor there. So people were already fatigued with the fact that they were doing this and they were sick and tired of this. So there was a novelty factor there where it was like, oh, what's this? And how do I use this? I've never used a VR headset before. So yeah, there was, as I was dropping these off at people's stores, there was a quick demonstration distance wise, because what I can do is that with the Oculus Quest, because they were by far the cheapest and the most powerful headset out there at that point, is that because I can do a cast on the app from my phone, I can basically talk them through socially distance wise at that point, put on the headset, you'll see their screen, click this, click that, and eventually I took them through a very quick 20-minute demonstration for those who were unfamiliar with it, and then sent them a couple of video YouTube links as a how-to video. The other issue is that some of them obviously don't have Wi-Fi. So you're always, as well as giving out a headset's no good without Wi-Fi. So this is where we then used the Vodafone dongles that we got through the Connecting Scotland scheme, because these families were still the same families that were still needing the laptops. And when I was delivering them out prior, I had already identified the young people who may be benefiting from a VR headset for this pilot. So the dongles were strong enough, were powerful enough to actually run the VR experiences. So that was how we then addressed the infrastructure issue of a lack of Wi-Fi for some of those families. So that, and that was basically, and then the other part that we did for all of them is that online we took them all through kind of 30 odd minute health and safety VR experience, because one of the other things that we were aware of is that we were introducing a lot of young people, and particularly young people who've never used VR before, to VR environments, so VR chat, where, because obviously they can use this, and we're encouraging them to use this new piece of technology out with the times that we were meeting, and about how to protect themselves online, just the same way that we would do with, cyber security, and identity theft, and all these kind of things that lots of youth organisations taught. So we had then developed a workshop around about, keeping yourself online in a VR environment and what to do and what not to do.
Great, thank you. I'm sure there must be other questions or observations, so please jump in, anyone who's got something they're wondering about.
Yeah, can I come in, John and
Yeah.
Darren? We've obviously some of that is familiar territory, and it's been exciting to sort of see how that's developed over the last couple of years. And there's just, to me, there's a kind of interesting point around how we can use digital to benefit young people rather than for it to have a negative impact. And obviously, Darren, you started with kind of the youth work precept that we're trying to build relationships, and that actually, we're looking at VR in the context of how can we use it in that way to build relationships. And I think that's a kind of really interesting point. I was reading something earlier on in the week about augmented reality and kind of where we might be in 5 years or 10 years, and kind of the living, the notion of more and more of our lives being in that virtual world, and just kind of thinking about the implications of that, and thinking about how does youth work continue to contribute when and if that is the case. So this is not, I don't know, it is a question, but it's just a bit of kind of live thinking, I suppose, around that topic. And I have heard people talking about VR in a youth work setting and talking about the idea that it enables young people to explore presenting themselves in different ways in that VR setting. Now, I was interested that you didn't talk about that, okay? But I think there's an important conversation to have around that, I think, and about both the benefits and the potential challenges and dangers of that business of being able to control how you present yourself to an even greater extent than you would in a social media type setting. Does that make sense? No, stunned silence.
I think Darren's picture may have frozen.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's got a response.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. But no. So one of the things that
You've frozen again.
we had, again, when am I freezing?
Yeah, do you want to try just knocking video off for a second and see if the audio works?
Okay, how's that?
That's grand, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that Hilly quite rightly pointed out, which was a concern for us in terms of safeguarding, is that with a number of these platforms, because they're so sophisticated, you can actually do a 3D scan of your face, because it's all about replicating as much as you possibly can of that in-person experience. And that was one of the things that we initially shied away from, because we didn't want, what we did is we did close, like if they were comfortable and they wanted to play about with the technology and they were happy to do a 3D scan of their face of their avatar, that was fine. But if you didn't, you didn't have to. But at that point with the technology, particularly with spatial, that was all that you were left with. You either did a 3D scan of your face, or it was a kind of computer generated image. And what they've done now with the platform as of today is that they completely customized it. So that video that I showed you was quite an old video, because it's only one half of you that you see and there's no legs. What they've done now is that they've done a fully fledged body with legs and arms and everything all moves to replicate a more real experience. But what they've done now is they've completely customized every part of that. So you can demonstrate your alter ego or an alternative type look that reflects your personality, as opposed to an actual, real 3D scan of your face. So yeah, that was one of the things that we did when we were investigating and experimenting with using young people within VR. We tend to not, go in the full boona in terms of all the scanning of the faces and everything else, because we didn't want to expose young people to dangers that we weren't aware of, because again, we were still kind of developing this in real time as to what those potential dangers and concerns might be that we weren't aware of either. But ultimately, the technology itself for us was a means to an end. It was just to develop meaningful relationships and engagements. And we just found that VR was the best, closest way to do that as a next step from video conferencing. But, there was parts of it that we consciously chose to leave out, such as what Hilary had pointed out at that point, because then we weren't very clear as to what on the underlying risks that might be at that point.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. My other observation is just around that kind of sense that what you're actually delivering there is successful based on the knowledge and skills of an understanding of the person driving it. So I think youth workers who were really comfortable with the environment that they were delivering digital youth work in, or are delivering digital youth work in, actually you see really good engagement. Whereas I hear frequently from youth workers who say, well, it didn't work. It didn't work, and actually that often is a result of them not feeling comfortable and confident about whatever environment they were using.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Stephen might want to come in at this point, because I did a session with the VR, but I eventually found where Douglas Connections was, because I got lost the first time. And we did a session with their young people, and that was just a taster session where they were just having a laugh and a riot and creating 50,000 skyscraper sized cakes and things like that, I remember. But I don't know, in terms of that was a taster for them, but also more so for Stephen as well, to show them the capabilities of what this tech could do. So I'm not sure if you took that any further forward, or whatever happened with that, Stephen.
That's why I'm here today, is for the wee refresher, because we're building into that. We've kind of got our own virtual headsets and stuff. The programs, one of the guys, Alex, that was on our thing, he's built like a youth centre in Rec Room, and we've kind of, so like they were trying to like use that as like a kind of meeting space, and I had different branches of it. So we've got to the point now where we're just trying to get the groups together and then try to get them working collaboratively across like our areas kind of thing. But it was basically because of finding it for you, and a guy, I can't remember the other guy's name, that one of my other colleagues was involved with, a guy from Ireland, and getting both kind of sets of experiences and stuff, and seeing where we were going to fit it in. But I know we're looking forward to getting it started. It's just been, obviously after the pandemic, everything else happening at the same time, trying to get this one off the ground. But no, we're looking forward to it.
Good.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts for Dan? James?
This was great update. Just wondering
Yeah,
if
James.
they are. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, James has put one in the chat.
I was inviting James to come and chat.
You talking about things
I'm
like
not
that?
always great at doing video conferencing and talking, so I just put it in the chat to make
Oh,
myself
no.
succinct in my words. But yeah, I just wondered if there was anything at the same time that was explored, but you noticed that there was a greater uptake with the VR because of the technology based, and whether the fatigue that you mentioned was a big factor.
Yep. So one of the things that we didn't do it then because it was a pilot that we were developing, and we expressed to the funder at that point, you know, the lottery, because they gave us, you know, £10,000 to buy 30 odd headsets. And we were explaining that this was going to be a kind of closed group, and you know, a kind of development of young people taking this technology to where the direction of where they wanted it to go. So we weren't very clear about what the outcomes were going to be. And one of the things that we were interested in was, I think at that point we were experimenting with big screen, because we liked the idea of all the young people coming together and just sitting in a virtual theater, cinema, and just sitting and you know, watching a movie together or a TV show. But we would all meet in the lobby, and that lobby was accessible to everybody on big screen. And some of the young people got approached, just, you know, by other people who are just being friendly and things like that, but they were a bit, I don't know you, you're a stranger, stranger danger and all this kind of thing, and that was kind of interesting. And so at that point we decided, because we were still developing this and we weren't quite clear around about the risk factors, is that we wouldn't, you know, use big screen or anything where other people could access to. So we tend to use Engage VR, and we tend to use Spatial, but they have developed over the past 2 years massive on VR conferencing platforms that are really, really professional looking. And what we had did for, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, a chap called James Delio, I think his name is James Delio, from Soapbox down in Islington in London. He was also kind of developing VR spaces, and together we had developed a conference for Digital Leaders Week called Beyond Video Conferencing. And we invited a whole bunch of people at that, and we all invited Spatial and Engage to come on and speak and talk on it. And from that, from a YMCA point of view, we then started to look at how can we engage the four nations within the UK to engage their young people in a conference. And that's one of the things that we're starting to develop and look at now, is to then start getting young people from across the four nations to engage in virtual reality in a conference, and develop that as something that's going to either develop an idea or bring a group of young people again who would not normally engage with each other to develop their own kind of online VR conference in partnership with these platforms. But we've not done it yet, so but it's something we're interested in.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I kind of think, I mean, I'm exploring some stuff around Zoom's new Zoom events platform, and it kind of feels like we're kind of on the cusp of something, but the technology's not there right now in terms of the kind of non-VR stuff. It still feels that kind of clunky way. And particularly, I think, in terms of like how people come together and network and collaborate, that can still feel rather clunky. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. It probably ties in quite nicely, actually. Leanne's got a question about, curious to hear where you see VR taking employability in the future. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one, Dan.
Yeah, I should be with you 2 minutes and just try to type and
You're
speak.
multitasking. Yeah.
No, my strong point. Sorry, what was that question again there, Ross?
So Leanne had asked a question about, curious to hear where you see VR taking employability in the future.
Yeah, so there's a lot of the stuff that I've learned and picked up a lot of my ideas from is a chap called David Sim. Find him as well, both on LinkedIn. And David Sims, that's one of his large focus points, is about augmented reality, virtual reality, right across education and business in particular, and health developments. He's sitting on a panel at the moment about the metaverse and about how the metaverse, I mean, you have things like meta universities now, and because a lot of universities are developing, particularly Glasgow University, I think Edinburgh University as well have developed quite extensive education virtual environments for students. And in terms of businesses, we're developing with Tayside YMCA as part of an incubator, a virtual incubator, because it's a rural area. What the idea is with that is to distribute VR headsets, of course, again with the infrastructure of Wi-Fi, to rural areas, so that they can take part in a hybrid with young people who are going to be taking part in an incubator within Tayside YMCA's in-person incubator development within the building, and in a virtual reality as well simultaneously. And that's going to allow young people or anybody within the community who has mobility issues, so if they're wheelchair based, or they have coordination issues and things like that, they'll be able to do much more of those tasks with their able-bodied counterparts in a virtual space more easier, to develop their own business ideas or contribute as part of a team to business ideas, but also allow for particular rural parts of the Highlands and Islands and things like that to come and meet and develop their own incubators and ideas. And interestingly enough, we're starting to develop that through what's called the HP Life program. So that's a certificated program that we're running, that the World YMCA are in partnership with, and they do a certificated basic building blocks of an incubator, what goes into. So they do a design thinking, finding funding, and what is a social enterprise. And then once they go through that, we're now starting to develop an incubator business space in VR, using various different types of platform, because of the tools that are starting to really develop for these kind of ideas. And Tayside YMCA is going to be one of the kind of pilots that you'll see over the next 6 months. It's going to be championing that.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. Mary's put a link as well to David's LinkedIn if anyone's interested in connecting with him. Any other questions or thoughts? James, do you want to jump back in?
I'm just interested to know where this Tayside YMCA, I'm based in Dundee, so it's just interesting to know where it's going to be happening.
Oh, right, are you? Right, okay. Well, part of it's going to be developed in Perth and Kinross, Perthshire area, but also in Brodie Ferry.
Okay.
So, yep, I've got your email and you've got mine now. So, yeah, I can fill you in more on that further down the line. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Dan. Brilliant. Anyone else want to jump in? Leanne's just actually put some information there about Enable. I know, Leanne, your connection's a bit flaky, so I'll maybe read out what you just put in there for those of you who not got access to chat. Or can you do audio only, Leanne?
I can. I'm keeping my camera off just because my Wi-Fi keeps kicking me out, and then fun, the usual. Ironically speaking about digital, and I can't even get the Wi-Fi to work. But yeah, so we're probably in the infancy of our kind of exploration around VR at Enable, where I guess, being completely honest, it stemmed from me getting an Oculus headset for Christmas and trying it. And my perception, if you'd asked me before I got it, could I use VR, would have been no. and actually they're very straightforward to use, I think, but not necessarily aligned with what we need them to do, because they're more for gaming and entertainment. So I've just finished a piece of research on it for my dissertation, and really keen to just make sure that we're not doing this in a silo on our own, that if there's other stuff that's happening across the sector, we're kind of connected to it so we can share that learning. We've just rolled it out to our schools programme, and it's a it's a long-term strategy for us. It's not something we're looking to do pretty quickly, and we have to look at funding and all that other stuff that goes along with it. But just really keen to be involved in anything that you're looking at so we can learn from you guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of really interesting things that are going to be happening right across the board. I mean, Stephen will inevitably take it in a different direction from what I've done, and then there'll be stuff that they'll be able to pick up from what he's been going to develop as part of his offering. And I know that Hilary, again, there's stuff there that she's looking at as well, in terms of the engagement with it, with some of the other projects that we've discussed. So there isn't anything that I've found that's like so there's a makerspace community that's now developed because there's a number of people now that have developed makerspaces, and there's a thing that Hilary coordinates and facilitates that brings all of these interested parties together. So it might be interesting if there's a scattering of virtual reality youth and community development happening across Scotland, for that to be brought together as well, for us to share and develop ideas, because I'm coming across those kind of things as well. Interestingly enough, there's a woman from Brodie Ferry who's doing our PhD, and she's looking at trauma informed work with young people, a dissertation, which is a huge piece of work for her. She's interested in getting involved in it as well after it. So it's not just for the sake of writing your 50,000 word thing and then it gets put in the shelf. So again, and she works with Bernardo's. She's with Bernardo's and the Violence Reduction Unit, and they're looking at what they could use VR for. So again, if there's conversations there to be had, then that might be something, Hilary, for you.
Yeah, I've been aware of that for a while, to be honest. That VR might well be. The reason why we're running a digital makerspaces learning community is because we went to Education Scotland and said, can you give us some of your STEM nations professional learning money? And that's what we think we should be using it for, because we were looking at the work Darren's been doing, the work other people have been doing, and feeling that digital makerspaces were a real kind of key offer for young people at the moment. They kind of hit, if you look at the National Youth Work Outcomes and you look at what we're trying to achieve, digital makerspaces are relevant to every single one of those National Youth Work Outcomes. And of course, VR is a virtual way of delivering something similar. Young people are interested in digital. They need to develop digital skills. Telling them that they need digital skills and helping them to learn those will work for some young people, but it won't work for all of them. And it's the harder to reach young people who actually need the most inspiring, the most kind of entrepreneurial approach, these sorts of things. So yeah, I would love to see a kind of a VR community developing, and I think that could be a really, really good thing to be doing. So we would just need a wee bit of time and a wee bit of money, and off we go. And I'm sure that's a doable thing. So half a dozen people interested in that topic, and we could try and identify something similar. Yeah,
brilliant, fantastic. It's such an interesting sphere. I think the world of VR and what it, when you look at the capabilities that it has and how that could transfer across into some of the stuff that we do, and even at a very basic level, we kind of see it as something that, if nothing else, that kind of the digital divide and digital poverty, is working towards those types of things where some of our clients won't ever own a mobile phone or an iPad or anything like that, never mind put on a VR headset. So you're sort of engaging people in digital skills through an entertainment process almost, if you're just looking at you know, Oculus as they stand at the moment, that engages them in a way that we probably could never do. So it's really smart. I think the capabilities of it are phenomenal.
Yeah. Leanne, are you aware of the work at Strathclyde University? They've got a group called the Digital Health Group.
I am.
Yep.
I've not met them yet, but it's Strathclyde that I've just done my dissertation for my master's through. So
yes,
any chance that I get to mention VR, just to try and make connections on it, because as I say, we're definitely not digital experts. We're far from it, to be honest. And I've also spoken to a company called Edify at Glasgow University, who are doing some fantastic stuff around VR. So there's so much happening, but it seems to be predominantly academic focused. And what I'm kind of looking to do is try and drag that into the
real world
sector, yeah, so that, you know, it can deliver some real results. So, and one of the things that I found so my dissertation was on how you could look at the model of supported employment and kind of digitally transform it, where we know that it's best practice for disability employment support, but actually nobody's ever looked at it through a digital lens ever. You know, I think it started in 1970, and I think the last time it was reviewed in Scotland was 2012. So the world of digital is advancing at a really fast pace, but the third sector providers who are delivering this type of work aren't. And it's predominantly down to funding and lack of knowledge and things like that. So we sort of see it as an opportunity to make the two worlds collide, if you like, and make sure that disabled people are getting the best support, because ultimately they're just kind of being left behind at the moment in that digital sphere.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. That's really, really insightful points. And I think without sounding like a broken record, one of the things that we kind of speak a lot about in this is that need for digital leadership. So this would be my two shameless plugs, that we will have another digital senior leaders program coming up that you'll be able to apply to via SCVO. Also, if you are a youth work organisation also working on tackling drug deaths in Scotland, you might be eligible for the Digital Lifelines Senior Leaders Programme that's available at the moment, so we can put a link in the chat for that. The other thing is we've got a partnership with YMCA Scotland, where we're doing some work around getting people from tech sector onto charity boards, and that's specifically for YMCA-based organisations. So if any in the room are interested in that, you can come along to that in, I want to say, September, Darren. You can correct me if I'm wrong. October, that's right. So we'll have that. And Maddie's just put a link to the Digital Leaders programme for Digital Lifelines as well, so you can go and explore that. John or Maddie, any final thoughts from you on this?
I think it's really interesting to see it continue to evolve, and I think it's really interesting. It's like a lasting way of working that may people keep engaging with even after real life stuff is coming back, and I'd be really interested to service pattern, service recipe come together when it's published. I guess the other thing, Ross, is to highlight the next DigiShift. So that'll be the end of September. So as usual, the last Wednesday in September, and we'll have Zoe Amara talking about the charity digital skills survey. So I guess we could keep in mind VR and see if that came up as a theme. I mean, that report's looking at the skills gaps that exist in charities right across the sector, but that'll be an interesting discussion, I'm sure. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Darren, for that great presentation and sharing the story of the work you've been doing. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was really interesting. Thanks so much. As John said, just keep your eyes peeled on the SCVO events page, and you can book into anything that's coming up. Okay, thank you very much. And the next one's number 60 as well.
Yeah.
Bonkers.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You're getting a free bus pass soon.
Right, enjoy the rest of your day, Joe. So see you all later.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, everyone.